Have you ever wondered why some men, especially those past 50, begin to speak less, not just with their mouths, but with their presence? He doesn't shout, he doesn't complain, he simply recedes, not into weakness, but into silence. And not because he has nothing left to say, but because he has already said too much to a world that never truly listened. This silence isn't a void. It's a chamber, echoing with the weight of unlived dreams, misfired loyalties, and the slow erosion of a man's name in a household that once bore it with pride. When a man over 50 grows quiet, the silence becomes his protest, his confession, and his sanctuary all at once. Jung would say this is the man confronting his own shadow, not the enemy without, but the one that grew alongside him inside. Because in his youth, this man was taught to build, to conquer, to provide, to stuff grief into the corners of his spine and carry on. He was handed a script that said, "Be strong, be silent, be useful." And so he was. But now, the usefulness has begun to fade. The children he raised speak louder than him. The woman he loved may have stopped seeing him, not out of malice, but out of emotional muscle memory. The roles he once wore with honor, husband, father, leader, have loosened their grip. And in their place, silence has moved in. But do not mistake this silence for peace. It is full of noise, ancient noise. Echoes of his father's unspoken apologies. Ghosts of moments when he felt love and could not name it. Wounds carved by women who never knew how deeply he felt. This man, now silver at the temples and slower in stride, carries generations of unprocessed emotion like sacred armor. He doesn't say it, but he aches, not just for touch, but for recognition. Some women think he's distant, cold, hard to read. But the truth is, he is saturated with unspoken devotion, with fears too ancient to articulate, with the soft ache of being needed less and understood rarely. In a world that celebrates noise and image, his depth has become intimidating, or worse, irrelevant. Carl Jung believed that what a man represses does not disappear. It grows teeth in the unconscious. And so this man's silence is not the absence of emotion, but its densest form. It is where his soul negotiates with the parts of him that were silenced before he could ever give them voice. The boy who wasn't allowed to cry. The lover who wasn't allowed to need. The husband who gave, until he no longer knew how to receive. You might think he's shutting down, but what if he's waking up? Not to the world, but to himself. What if the silence is where his true voice is starting to stir? And if you, listening now, are that man, or love that man, you must understand. His silence is not failure. It is not a sign of retreat. It is metamorphosis. In the cocoon of quiet, something ancient is cracking open. The mask he wore for decades is slowly being set down, not out of exhaustion, but out of sacred rebellion. He no longer chases applause. He no longer fights to be right. He no longer trades pieces of himself to earn momentary love. He is learning, finally, that his worth was never in his productivity, or his strength, or his ability to fix everything. It was in his presence. And now, in his silence, he begins to rebuild it, not to impress others, but to come home to himself. This is not a man who needs to be rescued. He does not want pity. What he needs, what he quietly yearns for, is to be seen. Not for what he does, but for who he is beneath the rust and the rhythm of routine. The man behind the silence still burns. And if you sit close enough to his quiet, if you lean into it, you will feel it too, the soft fury of a soul reawakening. And so, the silence deepens, not as a retreat, but as a descent into the hidden caverns of the self. The ones Jung warned are guarded by shadows we refuse to name. This is where the older man goes when the world grows too loud, too shallow, too scripted. He does not shout for help. He withdraws, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Because down there, in the inner dark, he is not lost. He is in counsel with himself. The world sees his quiet and assumes emptiness, but there is more life in his stillness than in all the noise that surrounds him. It's where he replays the arguments he never won, the apologies he never received, the love he gave without instruction, and through it all, the boy inside him watches, waiting, hoping to be claimed, not judged, not scolded, just claimed, because silence, for a man, is where the wounded child meets the weary elder. It's where the split pieces of his soul finally have a chance to speak. And what do they say? They say he was tired of fixing everything. Tired of having to be the anchor in a sea of chaos. Tired of being expected to have answers while never being allowed to ask questions. Tired of performing masculinity for people who never cared to ask how heavy the costume had become. Some nights, his silence becomes a ceremony, a quiet remembering. He walks through rooms lined with memories, the sound of his father's belt, the way his mother cried behind closed doors, the first time he was told, "Men don't cry." He relives the ache of loving a woman who saw his body but never his breakdown. And he watches, as though from a distance, all the moments when he was screaming on the inside but smiled anyway. This is the masculine shadow, the repression, the stoicism without soul, the prison of being needed but never nurtured. And as the silence stretches into days, into weeks, it stops feeling like loneliness and starts to feel like liberation. In his solitude, he meets parts of himself long exiled. The sensual part, the poetic part, the part that used to dream in color but was told to trade it in for grayscale responsibility. And yet, not all who approach him in this silence understand its language. Some demand explanations. Some try to fix what they assume is broken. Others label him cold, unavailable, emotionally distant. But that's only because they don't understand the terrain of a man becoming whole. They see the surface, what he no longer says, the phone calls he doesn't return, the way he looks out the window too long, and they mistake it for detachment. But the truth is, he's attached more deeply now than ever, just not to illusions, not to performative relationships, not to people who only come close when they need something. He's attached to authenticity, to energy that doesn't lie, to presence that doesn't perform. Jung said that the first half of life is about building a persona, and the second half is about tearing it down. This man, this silent man, is in that sacred tearing. His silence is not the absence of identity. It is the undoing of masks. Every word he chooses not to say is a brick removed from the false structure he once thought he had to live inside forever. This is not decay. This is the masculine psyche initiating itself, without applause, without an audience, without reassurance. And yes, it hurts. There are nights he remembers the woman he lost, not because she stopped loving him, but because he stopped showing her what he truly felt. There are moments he wishes he had been braver with his softness, fiercer with his boundaries, more vocal with his needs. But regret is part of the passage, and it teaches him now, in silence, what noise never could. Because he's no longer interested in being understood by everyone. He's interested in being true to himself, even if no one notices, even if no one claps, even if the only witness to his healing is the echo of his own breath at midnight. There is something unshakable in a man who has survived his own silence, something in his eyes that no longer seeks validation, a depth that unnerves people who live on surfaces. By the time a man reaches his 50s, he has likely walked through fires no one applauded him for, carried burdens he never named, and now, in the quiet space he carves for himself, He's no longer asking for anyone's permission to feel. This is where his true power lives, not in dominance, not in wealth, not in the loudness of his voice, but in his ability to sit with his own soul without flinching. This is not a man who needs to be fixed. This is a man who has learned how to live without pretending. There are moments now when he disappears, not physically, but emotionally. He will stare into the distance with a stillness that feels like another language. What is he thinking, you wonder? But the truth is, he is not thinking in the way you know it. He is remembering. Not just memories, but truths. Ancient, instinctive, spiritual truths about who he was before the world told him who to be. Carl Jung taught that the unlived life does not disappear. It waits. It waits in dreams, in symptoms, in addictions, in restlessness. And now, in the second act of his life, this man hears it all. The echo of the guitar he never picked up, the book he never wrote, the forgiveness he never gave himself. These aren't regrets, they're invitations. And he's finally listening. Some people misinterpret this phase of silence as disconnection, but it's the opposite. It is hyper-connection, just not to what the world expects. He's no longer tuned in to social games, shallow flirtations, or the race to stay relevant. He's tuned in to presence, to the sacred, to the pulse of what's real. If he loves you, he won't say it often, but when he does, it will feel like thunder beneath your skin. Because older men love differently. They do not chase, they recognize. They do not perform, they witness. They do not offer their hearts easily, but when they do, it is not part of them, it is all of them. And yet, if you ask him what he wants, he may not give you a straight answer. Not because he's unsure, but because what he wants cannot be named in ordinary language. He wants honesty, but not the weaponized kind. He wants space, but not abandonment. He wants a touch that doesn't try to fix, a gaze that doesn't seek to own. He wants peace, but the kind that includes fire. This man has no patience for pretense anymore. If you lie, he will see it. If you flatter, he will hear the hunger behind your words. If you stay, stay with your soul, because he will not settle for anything less. You don't get to perform love with him, you must live it. He may never tell you about the nights he sat alone in his car, just to gather the courage to walk back into his own house. He may never describe the slow bleed of realizing he'd been everything to everyone, yet never known what it meant to be chosen for himself. These wounds are too old, too sacred to be handed out like stories, but they live in his silence, and if you truly listen, you'll hear them. He has outgrown the need to be liked. He has even outgrown the need to be understood. What he craves now is resonance, alignment, stillness that doesn't require explanation. And in that stillness, he is not dead. He is not numb. He is awakening to the man he was always meant to be. Not the version the world raised, but the one his soul shaped in secret. So if you find him now, half smiling at nothing, eyes soft with memory, know this: you are not meeting a man in decline. You are meeting a man in sacred rebellion. He has stopped trying to win the world. Now he's winning himself. There is a rare kind of strength in the man who has surrendered to his own silence and made a home there. Not a silence born of suppression, but one forged in clarity, a kind of earned quiet that speaks louder than noise ever could. By the time he enters this phase, past 50, he no longer fears being misunderstood. What used to sting, being overlooked, underappreciated, misjudged, has become irrelevant. Not because he's bitter, but because he's awake. This is the man who has stared down the emptiness behind applause, who has given years of his life to other people's needs, only to realize he neglected the most sacred relationship he would ever have, the one with himself. And now, in the stillness of his own presence, he rebuilds. Slowly, intentionally, without performance, he becomes less reactive. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he's no longer willing to waste energy on proving or persuading. He's tasted the exhaustion of that game. He's walked the miles of people-pleasing, and now he knows peace costs too much to keep trading for approval. Carl Jung once said that to confront the shadow is to become whole, and that's exactly what this man has done. In private, without fanfare, he faced the ghosts of the father who never said, "I'm proud of you." He stared down the memories of the nights he felt invisible in his own marriage. He remembered the betrayals, both given and received, and refused to keep pretending they didn't hurt. But he didn't stop there. He went deeper, into the ache of missed moments, into the loneliness that visits even in crowded rooms, into the questions that don't come with answers. What was it all for? Who am I now? And what's left of me that's mine? These are not the questions of a broken man. They are the questions of a man who refuses to die asleep. And when he rises from that silence, something in him is sharper, not harsher, but more defined. His no comes quicker now, and without guilt. His yes is slower, because he knows what it costs to commit. He's not seduced by chaos anymore. He recognizes the energy of people who feed on drama, and he steps away before their stories become his burden. To the untrained eye, he may look distant, but what you're seeing is discernment, presence, boundaries. His love is no longer scattered, it is sacred. He gives it like fire, warm, intense, and dangerous to those who come unprepared. And for the woman who finds herself drawn to him, be warned. You cannot seduce him with surface. He is unmoved by performance, untouched by manipulation. What he longs for now is something rarer: reciprocity, integrity, emotional depth that doesn't need to announce itself. He wants a love that can sit in silence with him and still speak volumes. Because he's not looking for someone to complete him. He's looking for someone who has completed herself. There will be days when he doesn't say much. Don't take it personally. He's speaking to something older inside himself. There will be moments when he walks away from things most men chase: arguments, validation, attention. Don't mistake that for apathy. It is mastery. He has learned that not everything deserves his fire. Some things only deserve his absence. He no longer fears being alone. In fact, he chooses it, when the alternative is a connection that costs too much of his soul. He no longer settles for half-heartedness. He no longer lowers his standards to be understood by people who refuse to deepen. He is not here to be rescued or to rescue. He is here to walk beside someone who has made the same descent and returned whole. This is the individuation Jung spoke of. The point where the man becomes not a reflection of others' expectations, but a clear, autonomous expression of his own essence. And now, his very presence becomes a quiet revolution. He doesn't need to shout. His energy speaks. He doesn't chase. He chooses. And when he finally opens his arms, not out of need, but out of overflow, it is not to possess, it is to share. Not to escape loneliness, but to expand love that was already full inside him. This is the power of the man who went silent and returned sovereign. The man who knows his worth doesn't explain, he simply walks. And now, the man who once poured himself into roles, battles, and unspoken burdens, walks forward without the weight. Not because he's finished growing, but because he's finally growing on his own terms. He is no longer chasing youth, nor resisting time. He is neither bitter nor broken. He is full with the truth, the silence, the fire he reclaimed for himself. And from that silence he rises, not louder, but clearer, not faster, but deeper. This is not the end of his story. This is the first time he's telling it without compromise. He does not return to prove anything. He returns to choose everything. If something in these words echoed your own silence, don't let it pass unnoticed. Leave a comment, even just a phrase, to mark the moment you stopped performing and began becoming. Subscribe for more poetic reflections on the deep inner life of men after 50. And share this with someone who needs to know. Silence is not surrender. It is the beginning of sovereignty.